So a few months ago, before this whole pandemic situation we're in, Bong Joon-ho swooped the Oscars with the film Parasite, and that kind of inspired me to do this video because I feel like it's time for a list ranking all of his feature films because, you know, he's pretty good at making movies. Actually, nah, he's not just pretty good at making movies, he is one of the best at making movies. In fact, a lot of the movies that I'm going to show on this list have become classics for Korean cinema. Mainly South Korean cinema though, because not a lot of movies are getting made in North Korea, aside from the movies made by the one filmmaker, Kim Jong-un. But aside from that, there's like nothing there. Anyway, before making this list, I hadn't actually seen a lot of Bong's work prior, because it's mainly accessibility issues. For some reason, a lot of these films can't be watched on streaming services, so you either have to seek out the physical media, like Blu-rays, or in some cases there might be only a DVD version available, so you're not even watching it in HD. You gotta watch it in 480p, which is like, bruh. So it took some effort to embark on a list like this, but I thought it'd be a cool idea for a video, so here we are, so let's just go. So I can see myself recommending any of Bong Joon-ho's films to anyone, except his debut feature film, Barking Dogs Never Bite. Now before watching it, I do what I do with every film, and that is obviously to go to one of the best websites to ever exist, doesthedogdie.com. I searched this film up and, oh jeez, yeah. So if that kind of thing makes you uncomfortable, then just skip this movie, because the movie starts out with the main character strangling a dog, okay? And obviously I can't really show the scenes, but yeah, it's in there. Aside from that, if I was to describe this film, I'd say it's more like a black comedy, right? Because the dramatic elements that are in there aren't really like the highlight. They're not the element that's featured very strongly. It's more the twisted sense of humour that comes out, and to be honest, I actually found some of it to be pretty funny, because the movie is pretty much about this graduate student who lives with his pregnant wife, who constantly works him like a bitch, telling him to crack peanuts or whatever, makes him walk the dog. It's just, he lives a pretty miserable life, and one day he's driven so mad that he kills a neighbour's dog just because it won't stop barking. Like, goddamn, this dude is fucking insane. So it's a pretty absurd concept, and I feel like that tone was kept pretty consistent because it only gets more weirder and wild. And if you're in for the ride, you're in for the ride. If you're not, you're just not going to be into it. And as for the second half of the film, I was actually getting somewhat into it, especially when the main character is just randomly walking on the street, kidnapping someone's dog, to then throw it off the roof of the building. Like, again, it's bizarre. But the first half I found to be really, really boring. This is the only film out of the entire director's filmography that is just not that good. And I was so bored for the majority of its runtime. I can't even call it slow burn, it is just straight up boring. And the whole story feels pretty disjointed, with the dialogue coming off a bit stilted at points. So A, don't watch this if you like dogs. B, don't watch this if you've never seen any Bong Joon-ho film ever, because once watching this film, it's going to turn you off from watching his other films, which would be very unfortunate. And even the director himself said that this was a stupid movie, so that should give you some kind of indication as to the quality of this. However, if you're already a fan of this director, then it might be worth a watch if you like binge watching all of his films in chronological order, because there are some great moments in the film where you can see some of Bong's filmmaking techniques really come out. And I always find that kind of thing fascinating when you're watching a famous director's first film and seeing which stylistic choices remain consistent through their repertoire of work. So I think that's the best way to watch it, is kind of as an exploration of the director himself and his filmography, rather than just watching this as a standalone film, because it really does not hold up like that. But you do see some elements of Bong's character, which is already clear in like the comedic tone. We can see he's always had that from the beginning, as well as his sense of style and the presentation, because I think the way the film's shot is pretty solid overall. The chase sequence being a big highlight, that was very entertaining with how it was shot, with it all being in this apartment complex. And the basement scene where the characters are talking about this ghost story is pretty engaging, with the use of close-ups and cutaways to the corridors to make the scene feel a little bit more spooky. And from binge watching all of Bong's films, you can clearly see things carry over, like the basement scene thing. That's kind of similar to the basement scene in Parasite, so it's really cool seeing that. And finally, the theme of class has always been prevalent in all of Bong Joon-ho's films, but he always presents that theme in a different way every time.
남편 도와줄 생각 안 하고, 비싼 개새끼나 사오고, 이런 비싼 고구마 맨날 처먹고.
So seeing those elements definitely makes this an interesting watch, but if this was just like a random movie by a random nobody, or just somebody else, then I don't think it'd be anywhere near as interesting to watch. But aside from that, I think performances were fine, and the music was pretty repetitive at times, And that's all I have to say really, so let's just move on to the next film because I'm getting bored just talking about this. At number 6 we have Okja. Now this came out when Bong was deciding to make English language films rather than films in South Korea, and for that reason that's probably why this is one of his most famous films that he's known for, alongside Snowpiercer. As both these films are really popular and also got considerable budget boost from his other films, and also Okja is probably his most accessible film, with it being a Netflix original, so really anyone can see it, unless you don't have Netflix, which I mean, I don't know who doesn't unless you're in poverty, but yeah. In fact, this was actually my first introduction to the director, so that further proves that point about streaming service, because you don't have to go through like extra hoops of ordering the film online, get a DVD or Blu-ray copy, or just torrenting it. But anyway, the movie's more lighthearted than most of the other films on this list. In fact, you could probably mistake this film for being like a kids movie, because the whole presentation does seem to be very friendly. However, once you delve further into the plot, you get some disturbing sequences, such as the scenes in the slaughterhouse, which are pretty fucked up. And the plot of the film is basically about a farm girl who's trying to save her pet pig, who is called Okja, the title character, from being slaughtered in the slaughterhouse. So the movie essentially serves as an allegory for how we as humans farm animals and then kill them to eat them in like burgers and such. So it does have a very pro-vegan kind of message, as well as being against corporations, because I see this movie is more about criticising the food industry rather than just saying we should all be vegan. And the film does portray corporations as being very heartless through the embodiment of the character that Tilda Swinton plays, and the only thing her character cares about is money, as we see in the ending. So in that way her character's kind of two-dimensional, but I guess there's a point to it because it's trying to say something about capitalism and such. But I did like how the movie did approach the whole vegan kind of thing without it feeling too preachy or anything, because it does involve this personal story of someone who simply just wants to get their pig back, and the whole message the film is conveying is used to support that story rather than weigh it down, if that makes any sense. And I found the message they were delivering to be pretty impactful in the film, with like the ending is obviously, it's not entirely optimistic, there's still some bleakness in there, and the character of Okja, even though she is an animal, we still care about her somewhat because we can see it's intelligent, it's an intelligent form of life, even though in real life pigs aren't that smart, they're kind of dumb. But in this film, kind of serves the point of what it's trying to get across, with this being a super pig, so whatever. But yeah, I sympathise with the pig and the girl trying to save the pig, although if I'm going to be entirely honest, I did have a chicken legend meal at McDonald's like a week after watching this. Anyway, there are other elements to appreciate about the film, obviously. Firstly, the VFX for the pig Okja was really good. I completely believe that it was a living, breathing animal throughout.
We need to get in there to the pixel. We need to match the shadows on the beast, on the fingers, and that needs to be perfectly smooth and correct, or the magic will fail.
Now, the performances I found to be relatively mixed. There were some characters who were really over the top, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. I already mentioned Tilda Swinton's character being particularly two-dimensional, and she is very over the top. I feel like it works with Tilda Swinton if she was like the only over the top character in the movie, like she was in Snowpiercer. But then there are other characters who feel more like caricatures than actual characters, like Jake Gyllenhaal in this movie. I found to be really annoying.
I'm an animal lover. Everybody knows that about me.
That's just me, but he is like extra. It was almost embarrassing. But honestly, I'd say the best performances in the film were actually from the Korean actors, more so than the English actors. But the main character was very good. I'm not going to bother pronouncing Korean names, because if I did that throughout this video, it's just going to be embarrassing for me when I mispronounce it. I did feel there were some pacing issues though, and it could have flowed a bit more smoothly, but aside from that, I don't have any other real complaints. It's just a decent film overall. So, let's move on to the next movie. At number 5, we have Snowpiercer. Now, this was the first English language movie directed by Bong, and barely anyone saw it in the theatres despite having big stars attached like Chris Evans. So it did bomb at the box office, and that mainly contributed to the shitty Weinstein Company and how they poorly marketed the film and distributed it, purposely giving the movie a limited release unless they cut around 25 minutes of the film to make it more, well, quote-unquote, accessible to a Western audience, but director Bong refused to do that, so that's why the film didn't perform so well. So yeah, there was a pretty funny interview from Bong where he talks about an argument between him and Harvey Weinstein over the final cut of the movie. So this particular argument concerns the scene between the fish gutting scene where the characters are going for the train, they find these like strange men and they're slicing the stomach of this fish. So basically Harvey hated it. He was like, "Why fish? We need action." And Bong told Vulture, "I had a headache in that moment. What do I do?" So suddenly I said, "Harvey, this shot means something to me." When Harvey asked what the shot meant, Bong replied, "It's something personal. My father was a fisherman, So I'm dedicating this shot to my father. And Weinstein told Bong that family is the most important thing to him. And that was the deciding factor in Weinstein letting Bong keep the fish gutting scene. And Bong said, thank you. But Bong remembered, it was a fucking lie. My father was not a fisherman. So yeah, pretty fucking savage from director Bong there. Respect.
My father was a fisherman, and then it's a total lie, of course.
But anyway, what is the movie actually about? Well, the movie takes place during this Arctic apocalypse where all life on Earth is extinct, with the exception of the inhabitants on this one train that circles around the globe, and the class conflict that Bong is obsessed with is yet again presented in a very interesting way, through the visuals and production design, as the class differences are represented horizontally, with 99% of the poor people on the backside of the train, and as you go forward, you see the wealthy elitist members in the 1%. The film almost plays out like a side-scroller with the characters marching towards their path in order to escape this system they're confined in. And the set of the train was really well done in highlighting how different the lifestyles were of this, like, bourgeois and proletariat classes here. As we start out in the dark and overcrowded sections of the train, and all the other sections of the train contrast with each other, showing off more wealth and extravagance. Which also just makes the movie visually interesting despite technically being set in just one location. And that's what made journeying through the train pretty entertaining, to see what would be behind the next gate and how that reflects our own society and culture. In those regards, it's really ambitious, and the way choices are represented through the camera work instead of just using dialogue is also really cool and further illustrates how, although Bong's filmmaking isn't necessarily like showing off too much in its presentation, it does have a purpose. It's very purposeful filmmaking in what the cinematography is trying to convey to the audience to better understand the story and the characters, as it's pretty subtle at moments. And we'll get into Bong's other filmmaking techniques in the later part of this video, as I don't want to say everything in just this section alone. But yeah, I really appreciate those elements of the film. However, it is a flawed movie. Despite having some really interesting concepts, I personally didn't feel too much of an attachment to many of the characters. And when some characters die, the emotional impact wasn't as strong as it should have been, and I think I only really noticed that weak character writing in this because Bong's other movies had some really great characterization, so when binge watching all of his movies together, you do notice a difference in quality slightly. Despite that, I will say Chris Evans was great in this movie. He pretty much plays the leader type character of this peasant revolution, and he seems to be all heroic, although there is one great scene where he slips on a fish. So that's not very heroic. We'll see that later on in the film he has to make certain choices, represented through like the left or right camera pan. And when we eventually learn more about his past in this really great scene where he's talking to Song Kang-ho's character, he talks about resorting to cannibalism, and that paints a whole new perception of this character. And that also fits into the whole theme of class and reflects the horrible scenarios that poor people are forced into, as we see this kind of thing happen in history where like peasant farmers start eating each other in like communist Russia with a major famine that happened there during the Civil War. But honestly, in this scene, it's just impressive the range Chris Evans has in his career, because you see him from playing very heroic characters like Captain America, then seeing him playing this character in Snowpiercer. And also, speaking of the cast, I liked how it was very diverse in the film, because it wouldn't really make sense if everyone, you know, the last people of humanity on this train were just white people. So it's cool that Bong actually included people from South Korea that he worked with before in his South Korean films like Song Kang-ho. Anyways, to wrap up, I do think the film was a bit slow in the first half, but that's not really a big issue to be honest. But yeah, I've talked too long about this movie, so let's just move on to the next film. At number 4, we have The Host. Now this is where we get to the real good stuff, okay? Now don't get me wrong, there is a lot I liked about both Snowpiercer and Okja. They're good movies, but they are nowhere near as good as Bong Joon-ho's South Korean language films. Discounting Bark and Dogs because that doesn't count, that was his first film, okay? But yeah, The Host is basically a monster movie about this giant mutated squid from the Han River which is contaminated by the American government, and this thing terrorizes South Korea. So I guess we'll start talking about the special effects for the creature, because although it is a bit dated now, I think it still looks really good. And again, I think that's mainly because of Bong's directing, which can make the little dated CGI still looks relatively believable, as everything from the cinematography, how it's shot with these tracking shots and the lighting and how that's used really makes it feel real and believable in this film's universe. And I also like how certain scenes don't show the creature in full, like there's this one POV shot from the father's point of view which employs like a shallow focus to it, making the monster more blurred in the background, focusing on the daughter. And it's techniques like that which help the scene feel more tense, because the movie has some very suspenseful scenes. But what's strange is that there are also other genres meshed into this film as well, like action and comedy, and they all blend in really well together. I've never seen any other director able to juggle so many genres at once, and tones as well, and it all feels completely natural, as one tone doesn't take away what the other tone is doing. Some of the humour is also very satirical and also pretty topical of the situation we are in right now, so if you're looking for something to watch to ease yourself with the kind of situation that we are in, then there are some pretty funny scenes in here dealing with a particular virus and such. And unlike the last movie, Snowpiercer, I liked pretty much every character in this, because I found the drama to be really compelling with this dysfunctional family. And one of my favourite scenes is when the whole family's mourning for the loss of the daughter, and what should be a pretty dramatic scene is made to be hilarious because of how the family reacts to each other. The performances are very exaggerated, and that's what really makes this scene as entertaining as it is, as they all have their own quirks, which again makes their interactions really entertaining. Because you have this uncle who is an alcoholic, then you have the father who's always sleeping at the most inappropriate moments, and also, yes, this character is yet again played by Song Kang-ho. As you may notice, this actor shows up a lot in Bong Joon-ho's films. It's kind of like how Robert De Niro is in a lot of Martin Scorsese's films, and just like that pairing, I think this director and actor make some really great stuff when working together. And this is also the film that really got director Bong some serious clout as a filmmaker, as this became the highest grossing film in Korean cinema at the time, and was very successful in numerous film festivals around the world. And this film definitely deserved that kind of recognition, so if you've never really delved into South Korean cinema, I think this is a good starting point into that culture, and to see how Asian filmmaking differs from like American filmmaking is also just a very entertaining movie, so I'm glad they haven't remade this film into an American remake like they did with Old Boy or something, so thank God for that. At number 3 we have Mother. Now, there are a lot of movies called Mother which gets kind of annoying when you're searching for it, and you have to include the date when typing for it, because then you get like Mother 2017, directed by Darren Aronofsky. It's just frustrating, but whatever. But anyway, this film actually came out 3 years after The Host, so this is 2009. And yet again, like The Host, it combines both serious and comedic story elements together, although I'd say this movie is definitely more depressing than The Host. And you can kind of already see that through the presentation, as it has a much more darker colour palette and light into it. Like, you could argue this film has a more realistic look to it than the more saturated line in The Host, or even his later film Parasite. And basically the story in this film deals with a woman who tries to solve this murder mystery to get her mentally challenged son out of jail, as he's blamed for the death of this young girl. And what this movie shows is the extent of the unconditional love that the mother has for her son, as she's on this mission to prove him innocent. And I think that's what really makes this movie work, is how sympathetic her character is, as this whole situation puts a strain on her in all kinds of ways. One from an economical point of view, as she barely has enough money to take care of herself and her son, let alone pay for a lawyer. And I felt this was another interesting thematic way to portray the negative effects of capitalism and what it does to the lower classes in society. I wouldn't even get a portrayal of like the upper classes as we did in movies like Snowpiercer. We solely focus on the low class here, and by doing that the conflict actually comes from people in the lower classes and like the people from the higher classes to the lower classes. In fact, this movie could be described as the opposite to The Host, because in The Host you see all the working class people work together in the end to defeat the monster, but in Mother you see how much the community is torn apart from the murder, as everyone believes the son committed the crime and the mother and the people just start clawing each other's throats. There's always this hostility between the citizens. So I find it interesting that Bong Joon-ho takes the idea of class and he explores it in so many different ways throughout his filmography, and we'll see that further again explored in his other movies that we'll talk about next. But yeah, I will also say the music in this film is also very excellent. You can probably hear the music already in the background if I put it in the video. And in fact the movie has a very interesting opening sequence which is very surreal, as we see the main character just dancing in the field alone with the music playing in the background. And immediately I was just like, what the hell is going on? so I was invested in the story pretty much on go. And the cinematography is pretty unconventional for the most part of this film, as the lenses that Bong uses and how he decides to shoot his actors from the side a lot of the time, as opposed to using more kind of like eye-level match shots where we can relate to the character. And I felt this kind of brought some distance between the audience and the characters, and that does actually feel very purposeful since there's a lot of mystery surrounding certain characters. And there are obviously some red herrings as to who actually committed this murder, as it is a murder mystery film. So that's another way Bong is adapting the language of film to better suit the story he's trying to convey here. And I especially love the ending and how that was shot, because it just all came together. So big spoilers, I know this entire video is pretty much spoiled the film, but big spoilers for the ending of Mother. But the reveal where the son was the murderer all along was really well done in how it's presented, as we can see the whole sequence of events through these windows. So it's like we're not even with the characters, but instead we're just witnessing them, as this brings a level of disconnect which felt very appropriate and almost poetic, since we believe throughout most of the film that the son was innocent, because that's what this movie is about. The main character believes her son is innocent, so we believe the son is innocent. That's why we root for her character to get some justice for her son, since it's made abundantly clear that she loves him from the beginning. So then to see the mother's reaction afterwards, it is just incredible. So yeah, I really loved Mother. That's all I have to say about it. So yeah. At number 2 we have Memories of Murder. So from a personal preference, I really like the story in this more than in the previous films I've talked about. It's one of the more interesting films in the director's filmography, as the story is so original that you really don't know what's going to happen next, and it's such a breath of fresh air, and stands as one of Bong's greatest achievements in my opinion, especially considering that this is only his second film in his career after Barking Dogs, because it's such a massive jump from quality from that film. That's no wonder why Bong Joon-ho is considered to be one of the greatest filmmakers of our generation, as he comes into this film with a cool concept, and his sense of humour and personality is all over this movie. This is really director Bong at his inception, so you could argue that this may be the most important film in his filmography. But anyway, what this movie is actually about is that there are these two detectives trying to solve this murder case involving a serial killer and rapist. And in fact, there's actually some crossover with his later film, Mother, which we talked about last, as that film portrays the police force as largely incompetent when dealing with a murder case, but he further developed and dissected how the police force works and the general perception of it in this film, as this film is actually based on real life events in Korea's first serial murders, which were between 1986 and 1991, and where the Korean police force couldn't manage these cases, because as you see in this film, there is so much chaos around the crime scenes, where you can see journalists everywhere, you can see people constantly destroying possible evidence like footprints in the mud, and the forensics team would arrive late, and we then see the resources Korea had were very limited, that they had to send evidence to America for them to analyze it and then ship it back, so it's just fucking crazy. And this movie is kind of a window into that time. I'm sure some of it is definitely heightened and exaggerated, because movies are an art form, so you definitely do have to exaggerate certain things in order to create drama and make it feel realistic. But what this movie shows isn't really that far from the truth. And furthermore, I really like the contrast between the two detectives, as the cop played by Song Kang-ho, yeah, again, you know, it's Song Kang-ho. But yeah, Song Kang-ho's character is the local officer who trusts his instinct, and the other detective is like a big city cop who comes to this small town, and there's like a lot of conflict between these two characters, as they were essentially binary opposites. And through the difference, we understand the other character better. They're kind of defined by what they're not. And I thought that was a really engaging dynamic to follow through this film. And in fact, one of my favourite scenes is when the two detectives are just at a table arguing, and the whole shot is just filmed in one take, and the camera just slowly zooms into this conversation, focusing the audience's main attention to these two characters. It's all very intentional filmmaking, again, from Bong. It doesn't feel redundant telling the story, but feels purposeful. Because in other movies, you'll just have the director shooting a lot of coverage, with close-ups and medium shots and over-the-shoulder shots, and just so much that it feels kind of unnecessary. Like, you don't need to film actors at every second. And I feel like Bong understood this, because in fact, doing that kind of coverage can actually damage a performance, as it just doesn't make the actors feel comfortable while performing. But here Bong purposely just allows the scene to naturally progress and not interfere with the performances at all, because the camera movement is very subtle, but again purposeful. That's the key word to describe Bong's filmmaking, really, is purposeful. And the expressive performances is what really pulls you into these characters arguing. The staging is also very well done. When the chief suddenly wakes up and enters the scene, we don't need like a close-up of the chief waking up, but instead the scene just still carries on, and this lasts for like a few minutes. It demonstrates that Bong knows exactly what he's doing when he comes into a scene to direct it, whereas other directors don't really have that same kind of vision for how a scene is going to play out. They just kind of film it from all different angles and decide, we'll decide which ones to use while editing. Not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but just shows that the director understands what is necessary to communicate to the audience without showing off in the presentation. It's like, what does the audience need to know? How is that communicated? And we see that throughout the film, where certain characters will just be in the background instead of being focused upon. And I find that approach kind of more effective, and once they're not necessary to the scene, we'll just see like the camera probably slowly pan away, or a different character will actually come in and block that character from the background. It's a really clever way of staging a scene with an ensemble cast. Because this kind of filmmaking isn't telling us this is what you should focus on. With like a close-up of this character, it just lets the audience do their thing. Just get into the story. And the ending is really great too. We don't get to find out who the killer is, which reflects the real life scenario and how the cases went unresolved in South Korea. And both of the main characters go through a major change, essentially, changing their own beliefs so that both the detectives become kind of like the reverse of each other, with Song Kang-ho's character now relying on hard facts and evidence, whereas before in the movie, he didn't care about that because he relied on his instinct. In fact, the movie makes a point to mention how Song Kang-ho believes that he can stare into someone and see what they're thinking just by looking at them. But by the end of the movie, he doesn't even trust this. He's like, fuck, I don't know. And the other detective now only trusts his instinct. He sees someone and immediately thinks they're guilty, whereas before in the film, he's always about the document, the evidence. He's like, the evidence never lies, it's right there written on the paper. So it's a really great character development there. Again, it's pretty simple, but it's very effective as well. And the last shot is also very effective, where we kind of break the fourth wall with this close-up, where Song Kang-ho is staring at the audience right through just staring at the camera, almost suggesting that someone in the audience could be the murderer, which is a pretty neat conclusion, not gonna lie.
아저씨도 막 너처럼 참 어렵게 자랐어. 어렵게 자랐고 되게 착해, 착하고 남자가 정도 많고 뭐 워낙 성격이 급하다 보니까 뭐 가끔씩 그런 일이 있고 그게 뭐 흠이 될 수는 없고 그런데 뭐 주먹으로 사람을 뭐 떼고 아유 인상이 더럽네 이놈.
At number 1 we have Parasite. Yeah, you probably predicted this. Probably before the video even began, honestly, because everybody loves this movie, and I actually briefly talked about it in my 2019 best of video, in a non-spoiler fashion, but also 100 other YouTubers have talked about this film, analysing the film in great detail with its symbolism and motifs. Like the first time I noticed the stairs representing the characters ascending and descending in class, I thought, oh, that's cool, but now everybody's talked about it, so it's not exactly a deep observation. It is quite on the nose, but also it is very thematically similar to Snowpiercer and the horizontal representation of class in that film, of course, but obviously this time it's vertical. In fact, a lot of Parasite feels like a culmination of all the class themes that Bong has been exploring in his films for like the past decade. And the importance this film holds in Bong's filmography is very apparent with the critical acclaim that this has been getting, as it is a foreign language film that the mainstream public really like, which is nuts. Like, not even a movie like Oldboy got this kind of insane recognition that Parasite has. So simply put, Parasite feels like Bong Joon-ho's entire career getting essentially like a second win, and probably the biggest second win you'll ever see from a foreign director making foreign language films. It's like he hit the reset button with his career with this film, because even though I like Okja and Snowpiercer, those two English language movies pale in comparison to Parasite, and I cannot wait to see what Bong does next in his career. But anyway, let's actually talk about the movie, because although the whole buzz surrounding the movie is, you know, an entire discussion in itself, in the importance it has in cinema, the Oscars, and also people getting angry about it, being like, the Oscars is woke.
How many people actually fucking seen Parasite? Can someone please raise your goddamn hand and tell me, for the love of Christ, how many fucking people in the United States of motherfucking America saw Parasite?
The movie itself is just amazing, so what else is there really to say about the movie? Like, yes, the directing is very well done, the acting is also great, the film also has a lot of clever things to say about class through the exploration of the two families. And unlike Snowpiercer, where the elitist characters are primarily one-dimensional, you do actually end up liking the Park family, as they are just people, but we obviously naturally side with the Kim family because they're the ones in poverty, they're the ones suffering, and the rich family's almost oblivious to the whole class warfare that's going on because they don't have to worry about it. And that's perfectly illustrated in the flooding scene where the Park family's looking at the rain, is like, oh, that's nice rain, that's like a nice thing to look at the window, whereas the Kim family's like, oh shit, my entire house is being flooded. It's really eye-opening in that regard. And the film is also so meticulously well crafted, from cinematography, which actually originated from Bong's very detailed storyboard, so even before shooting the film, he knew exactly how he wanted every shot to look like, and that's why there was actually no coverage shot for this film, just like Memories of Murder, because he knew exactly what he wanted to do when he got into a scene. So therefore those storyboards actually dictated how the film would be edited as well, so you really do get a sense that you're actually watching a film made by a person rather than like a studio or people in a committee. So this is a perfect example of auteur filmmaking in my opinion, and it's pulled off really well. But it isn't just the direction which is meticulous, but the whole production value, as well as almost everything you see in this film is a set, which is mind-blowing. Like the mansion is a set that the crew built alongside the basement and the semi-basement, and even this whole street is a set, which is insane because it looks and feels so real. But the reason they actually did build a set for the street was because they had to flood it, and obviously they can't flood a real street as it's like people's homes and such. But yeah, there is so much passion being poured into every frame of this movie, as everyone involved in the making of this film just wanted to communicate the vision to the audience. This is just an incredibly ambitious film, and it really paid off. So what a grand return to finally making South Korean films again from Bong. Every shot is purposeful, just like Memories of Murder. Like Memories of Murder, the presentation is simple, but effective, the drama is engaging, and there are lots of suspenseful scenes alongside many funny scenes in the film, yet again combining both dramatic and comedic tones really well. Like, director Bong is just the OG, okay, he's perfected his film craft. And I really love the ending, where it's just batshit crazy and all the lies and secrets become unravelled in a very explosive and intense finale. And the last shot of this film perfectly illustrates what Bong has been building up to throughout his career in terms of the negative effects of capitalism, as we see the son of the Kim family living in his semi-basement home with a brain injury after being knocked over the head with his metaphor. So he's unable to save his father, who is confined in the basement of the mansion. This hopelessness shows the main problems of a system that is designed around endless growth of wealth, as opposed to the well-being and justice of those living in the bottom of the system, as that singular purpose to warp the whole world into a dog-eat-dog world, in effect risks the lives of the vulnerable people in even more unfortunate circumstances than the working class, as people like the father, played by, again, Song Kang-ho, and the couple before him, living in the basement, are even below the semi-basement home that the Kim family preside in, as there is no indication at all of the outside world, of any sunlight, but instead, it's just a dark hallway with a closed door. In this film, there is no escape from this system which exploits the poor into working for the rich, except death. Okay, this video got a bit too Marxist at the end, but whatever, I think that is enough for this video. So yeah, this is a long video, but if you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and share. And if you come across channel for the first time, why not subscribe? And, you know, we'll make more videos like this in the future. You know the drill. Typical outro YouTuber stuff. But yeah, I will emphasize, please leave a like. Please. I feel that I should emphasize that, because I kind of say it, but you know, whatever. It does help out though, leaving a like, genuinely. But yeah, I think that's enough. So, peace.